tell you what you can do. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out with the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and cracker jack.
Good evening, and welcome to this evening's presentation, Hitting a Home Run When Buying a Home in a Condominium or Homeowners Association. Tonight's presentation is a joint venture between Zelmanski, Danner, and Fiorito, PLLC, and Real Estate Kate. Our coaching team tonight is headed up by Edward J. Zelmanski, who is a partner at Zelmanski, Danner, and Fiorito, who specializes in all aspects of condominium and homeowners association law and real estate law. Mr. Zelmanski has been practicing law for approximately 40 years, and he believes that education is key when working with homeowners, board members, and property managers. New to our coaching team this evening is attorney Matthew D. Levine. Matt is a senior associate at Zelmanski, Danner, and Fiorito with years of experience in real estate and consumer finance law. Matt is a member of the Michigan Regional Advisory Board for the Anti-Defamation League, and he's been on that since 2013. And last but not least, we have Kate Saulsberry, who is a realtor with Remerica, and she is the owner of Team Real Estate Kate, serving the Plymouth Canton area and the surrounding Metro Detroit area. She has over 20 years of sales experience and has been consistently doing real estate for the last 10 years. Our schedule for this evening, we will start with our pregame, which is an introduction and a roster of our players. We will go to first base, which will be general real estate considerations. Second base, we will talk about the initial considerations when purchasing in a condominium or homeowners association. Third base, we will provide you with the key information necessary to decide if a condominium or homeowners association is right for you. Then we will get to home base, which is closing that deal. And then we'll conclude with our post game, which is questions and answers. So we will start this evening off with Mr. Levine, who will discuss the players in this evening's game.
Thank you, Melissa. The first two should be pretty obvious to everybody. A seller and a buyer are the two primary actors in a real estate transaction. They have different goals. Obviously, a seller is looking to get the best price for their house, and a buyer is hoping to purchase a house for, well, the best price for them. The process has a lot of other actors involved. Kate will discuss what real estates do later, but generally the real estate agent represents either the seller or the buyer in purchasing the house, looking for the house, trying to find the best fit for a potential purchaser, and they help guide their client through the process of from the beginning to closing. Everything in between, finding the right home inspector, making sure that the communication between the parties is clear and in the client's interest. A home inspector is recommended for any transaction, so you know that you're getting, a purchaser knows that they're getting what they want. They know what the condition of the house is when they are in the process. After an inspection, that might create a situation where a purchaser or potential purchaser can renegotiate based on certain flaws or unexpected results of the inspection. But it should be noted that an inspection, a home inspection, is not a guarantee or a warranty, but it does provide some peace of mind for a purchaser. The title company is, well, a title company does many things. For the purposes of a sale, that is where usually the sale is conducted. The title company will make sure all the documents are prepared, that they are proper. A title company may also be involved in reviewing the title of the property to make sure that the purchaser does get actual title, that there are no problems with the register of deeds, and so the purchaser gets what they're hoping for. The condominium and homeowners associations are not directly involved in the actual closing process, but they are required to provide certain information, such as whether there are assessments owing, special assessments coming, they need to provide this information to the title company or the actors involved in the closing. The attorneys are always good to have an attorney review any documents, whether it be with a closing or otherwise. Attorneys can also help review title to make sure your interests as a purchaser or seller are being met with the documents, with the history of the property, and that you are not going to get caught with something unexpected after the closing.
And next at bat is Ed.
Well, good evening, everybody. I was always a fan of Norm Cash, the great Detroit Tigers first baseman, so I'm really glad to have this first base assignment for me this evening. I want to discuss general considerations involved in purchasing a residence, and I'm going to talk about 7 factors that you need to research when you're looking at buying a residence. The first factor consists of 3 things: location, location, location. Of course, that's a good old vaudeville line for dealing with real estate. Location is so important because real estate is unique, and the law recognizes every piece of real estate as being legally unique. And so where it's located, very important. Our discussion is really presuming a purchase of a property in the state of Michigan. But as you know, there are other locations. A lot of Michiganders like to head down to Florida to set up their winter nest down there and maybe eventually retire down there. And of course, there are a lot of other locations where you might consider to purchase a residence, whether it be, retirement, full-time residence, or a winter or summer vacation spot. But keep in mind that the laws differ from state to state quite a bit. So our comments about purchasing property in Michigan are based on our experience handling these transactions in the state of Michigan. But there will be differences from state to state. And so my word of advice is that you need to get competent counsel for the jurisdiction that you're in order to make sure that you're making the right choices. So in Florida, the laws and procedures are markedly different than in Michigan, and they vary from state to state. You might be looking at something exotic, like perhaps buying property in Mexico. Research the heck out of things like that. Where are you going? What are the requirements? What kind of laws are in place for foreign ownership of properties? Very important. Item number 2 then on our list of considerations, the style of residence that you can consider. Are you looking for a single family home, multifamily home? Are you looking for a condominium, which could be multifamily style, or attached units or detached condominium units? Are you looking for a residence in a homeowners association? Are you looking for new construction? Are you looking for acreage? Are you looking for urban property? Are you looking for suburban property? Are you looking for urban farming? You can do your research and find out you have an awful lot of options out there to help you decide what's best going to fit you. The third item for consideration is the cost of the property. And, you'll have to learn to match up your wants with the cost of the property, because there are an awful lot of things that I want. And when I see the cost, it kind of changes my trajectory. And I'm sure you'll find the same thing. What is the cost? What's out there in the market? When you know what the cost is, and really is kind of hand in hand with cost is number 4, financing for the transaction. You have different options available for financing, and cash. If you got a lot of cash on hand, great. If you don't have the cash on hand, you have mortgage financing available to finance the purchase, or you have other options like land contract purchases are available options too, to help you get to the position to be able to afford the cost of the real estate that you've selected. Fifth consideration, very important. What about the schools? You know, certainly if you have school-age children, or maybe you yourself are thinking of re-entering the education force, you know, what kind of school district are you in? I think personally, I'd like to see a strong school district, and that's an important asset and aspect when considering your what you're going to buy into. Number 6, other amenities. Keep in mind that there are other aspects to just the house and on the street where you live. What's around there? We mentioned schools. What about religious institutions? You know, where you practice your faith, and how you practice your faith and how important that is to your way of living. So keep in mind that that could be an important factor in selecting. Shopping, your ability to buy your necessaries, and where you draw the boundaries for what is necessary may be different with people. My necessities are very limited. Other people might consider other things like Nordstrom's to be a necessity. So keep that in mind when you're making your selections. And then entertainment options. What sort of venues are in the neighborhood? Where do you want to draw the boundaries for that? That might be the case that maybe a 20-minute drive to an athletic event is acceptable, or an hour drive. But keep in mind to factor in your entertainment options. Maybe that's natural things like canoeing and boating and swimming, skiing, those sorts of things. An important factor when doing these general considerations for where you want to go. 7th point I have is timing. And timing is so important a consideration when it comes to purchasing a residence. Right now, we've been in a seller's market, crazy seller's market, and Kate can tell you about that. And is it, on the other hand, as you get out of a seller's market, then it becomes more of a buyer's market. And so your timing for deciding to purchase might change based on your perception of, or the general perception of, whether we're in a seller's market or a buyer's market. When you look at the cost factor, the interrelationship there could be important, because right now the cost of real estate is high because of the amount of demand and the seller's market is operating. If you wait a while, if the real estate market collapses next year, then it'll be a good time to be a buyer. So you don't have to, you've got variables there to play with. If you feel compelled to purchase right now, then you're limiting your timing and you're going to end up with whatever kind of market is out there. But keep in mind that those market considerations change with time, and that timing is a variable. Timing isn't such a variable once you get into the process of actually making a commitment to purchase a residence. You sign a purchase agreement, all of a sudden you're going to be locked into a lot of deadlines and things where you must do things by a certain time period because of the contractual obligations that you assume when you sign a purchase agreement. So once you make that decision to sign a purchase agreement, you're going to be locked on and pulled along by a tractor beam of factors like inspection deadlines, financing deadlines, things like that. And so the notion of timing is really going to contract once you have actually engaged in the contractual process. So you've hit the ball, we're past first base, and now we're getting to second base, and Kate will talk about second base concerns, initial considerations when purchasing a condo or a house in an HOA.
Hi there. Hi. Thanks, Ed. Those are really great points that you brought up. And I am Kate from Team Real Estate Kate. And as a buyer's agent, when we are writing the purchase agreement, there's always a line, or there should always be a line in there that states that the seller will provide the buyer all the documentation if there is an HOA, Homeowners Association. So when you get those types of documents from the seller as a buyer, it's really important to look at it. There's pros and cons to everything. So specifically in buying a condominium, you're going to be limited to the rules and regulations that are set forth. So what I like to tell my buyers is to look at how you live. How do you live now, and how are you going to be affected in the HOA? So a lot of pros are there's less maintenance, especially if you're in a condominium. Many of those provide snow removal. Some of them provide utilities like water, building maintenance, grass cutting, things like that. That's a huge pro for people that live in condominiums. Cons might be, you are restricted to maybe how many planters you have outside, or what type of decor, or even down to what type of flag you can fly. There's condominiums that don't allow sports flags to be flown. So there are restrictions to consider, and that's really important to know what you're purchasing and to know what the restrictions are, and how you're going to live. How do you live now? How will you live with those rules and regulations? And also considering the type of development. So is it more of an apartment style? Are you going to have neighbors above you, below you? There's things to consider, like units that have top and bottom. They can have restrictions to flooring that you put in the upper units because it can amplify the sound. It's good to consider the age of the building and the type of materials that have been used, for fire safety, for soundproofing and whatnot. There's a lot to consider. The purchase agreement is always our guide, so that's where it starts. So you get provided all the documentation that the association has, so you can review, and absolutely staying on those timelines is so important. And when you do have a home inspection, it's important to have the home inspector inspect things outside of the owner's responsibility. So a lot of times roofs and attic and exterior features are key to be inspected, because that may not be the buyer's responsibility, but it's something that needs to be noted, and the association, it can be addressed with them to maintain some of those items that may need some maintenance on the exterior. And, just in my experience, I'll give you a quick example. I have a client who's moving from, she lives on several acres, and she moved into a condo. And she's been a bit challenged with some of the changes, but just understanding that she had a really beautiful sculpture that she wanted to bring, and I would assume we could all probably agree it's a beautiful sculpture, but the rules state that there's no sculptures allowed. So she's had to come up with Plan B, and so it's going to go to her son's house down the street, which is fine because he doesn't have a restriction for that in his subdivision. But so that's, those are definitely things that come up. And as a realtor, we are staying on the timeline, following the purchase agreement, reviewing all the documents, providing those to the buyer. And then the title company is reviewing the financials and what's included in the HOA and making sure that they, all the ducks are in a row on their end so that they can provide a clear and free title for the buyer. So there's a lot that goes into it. And I guess next is third base.
Thank you, Kate.
Thanks.
That good experience to bear with those real life examples of people having their dreams and aspirations and wanting to bring those with them when they move into the new place. So eyes open, you know.
Yeah, it can be very frustrating at times, but I remind people that, you think your sculpture is beautiful. There's a lot of different opinions out there. So sometimes it's good to just not have any sculptures because you can only imagine what someone might try to bring. And so that's just the reality of it. They try to keep the communities unified and to a standard that's pleasurable for most and all.
Yeah, the duty to conform, I think us Midwesterners maybe don't like to be told how to live our everyday lives. We're not used to that maybe as much as other people from other areas of the country or other cultures. Here,
I always remind my buyers that when they get frustrated, maybe over something like that, I said, just remember in the winter when it's snowing, you'll be sitting inside watching them plow your snow. So there's the pro for you. Definitely pros and cons.
We had a client who told me that he chose his association based on the rules and policies he wanted to be in place with absolute structure. So he knew what tomorrow would look like. He knew what yesterday looked like. And for him, that was a big draw.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's this particular client that I was giving the example of, they restrict the type of light bulbs that she's allowed to use. And it seems picky, but at the end of the day, when you drive down the street, there's not going to be 15 different shades of white and yellow and purple, green or whatnot. It'll look really nice and uniform.
So yeah, that, how much conformity is expected? How much do you want that? And so if you place a high premium on uniformity of appearance, there are places out there that are like that. They wouldn't have me for a resident, but because that ain't my style, but plenty of options.
My mom is a drummer, so we would have to definitely be looking at some of the restrictions, because some condos restrict musical instruments. So she would not be allowed to play her drums in certain condos. Pianos are a big thing. So not just outside, inside and they require a lot of different things, to get, if you're going to remodel a basement, they want to have the plans, motorcycles, boats, anything like that you would store or have on hand. So there's a lot of considerations. So I always think it's really important just to look at how you live and how you want to live, and then see how you fit into that. See how you fit with the rules. See if that's doable. If you're a huge avid gardener and you want to have a huge plot of land with gardening, I probably would not be suggesting a condo for you.
Or they might dictate the color of oats that you can grow.
Yeah.
So yeah, self-awareness. What your wants are so important.
You're somebody who has a lot going on outside of the home. You don't want to spend your time deciding what color to paint. You don't want to spend your time with certain lawn maintenance. You have other things to explore. This is a great option.
Yeah, there's a lot of pros. There's a lot of pros to condo living as well.
Yeah. carefree condo living, right? That's what we talk about. And so that just is what Matt's mentioning is, you know, if you want a place to lay your head down at night and get up and have your breakfast, but then you're going to be out and about all the time, then that tells you something about how much time you want to spend maintaining the exterior grounds or the structure itself. So, and there's a lot of information that can be available to help you make these decisions. So I think now we're going to advance the runners to third base and talk about key information that's available in this process. Certainly, this is something that, in my experience, practicing law, seeing the problems that present so often after someone has bought a residence, whether it's a condo or single family home, so often you just say, you know, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If you had just bothered to read things before you got yourself into this living situation, you may have saved yourself a lot of misery. And so as a buyer, you need to know what you can expect from the seller in terms of the information that they have to provide to you. And some of those requirements are going to be in the purchase agreement itself that you're going to consider signing to engage in the process of acquiring that residence. So the purchase agreement is going to contain some very important factors about what the seller has to disclose. Outside of the purchase agreement itself, there are some legal requirements for disclosures. For example, in Michigan, a seller of residential property is required to provide seller's disclosures to a buyer. And that is regulated by law in Michigan. Those disclosures take the form of a real estate form with a lot of boxes and regular things that the seller has to check off, tell you what kind of problems they may have or may not have with the property, or they don't know. And so that seller's disclosure form is important. I think of it as being rather kind of passive though, because it is a form, and the options for responding to different questions about the state of that residence, yes, no, or I don't know, can give an opportunity for someone to just kind of skirt around it and make a lot of base disclosures without really telling you a lot. Now, the seller in Michigan does have a duty to disclose hidden defects that cannot be discovered on ordinary inspection. And so, you know, and I've certainly seen a couple problems where it was apparent that the seller of real property or real estate was aware of a defect and did some things to kind of cover it up to help the sale go along. One example comes to mind was a residence with a kind of fresh coat of paint on a crude attempt at a mural in the basement. And what they had done was just kind of painted over a wall that they had had a lot of trouble with leaks in that wall. And so in order to kind of cover that up, they painted a nice sunshine mural. And the first time it rained, all the paint wore, just washed away right away. And then it became apparent that there had been a long time problem with a leak that, rather than be honest and talk about the need to properly repair that, they tried to cover it up. So, you know, that was a violation of the law and a violation of the seller's duty to disclose a latent defect like that. How do you get around those things? Well, there are home inspection clauses that you'll find in purchase agreements. And a typical purchase agreement isn't going to promise you that the property is going to be in tip-top condition. It's going to have what we call an as-is clause, that this property is being sold as is, what you see is what you get. And so the tool that enables the buyer of this real property to make their inquiries is the inspection clause. A home inspection clause is something you would want in your purchase agreement. And a clause like that typically will, again, have a time factor tied in. You sign the purchase agreement and you're going to then have a finite period of time within which time you have to have the property inspected by an inspector of your choice, and then make a determination, yes or no, whether you want to continue with the real estate transaction.
And I'm going to interject and say that in this market, we've seen a lot of clients waiving inspections, and I just can never recommend that. Because the inspections are so incredibly important, and there are things that we just cannot see when we're walking through the house during showings. So having an inspector who's trained to look for things like potential water damage or hidden things like that. I always find it frustrating to see those types of things being removed from the process, because they are so incredibly important. And there are ways to be competitive when it comes to purchasing in the inspection. You can lessen the time period that you do the inspection. So typically we'll see an offer giving 7 days to complete it. A lot of times we can have, get our inspector on the phone when we're writing the offer and get his schedule or her schedule and get the inspection period shortened to maybe a day or two, so the sellers can, feel that, we're not going to drag this process on. That's one way to kind of still have the inspection be completed. We can also write the offer so that the buyers are stating ahead of time, we're going to have an inspection, but we are not going to negotiate any of the repairs, or we may not negotiate anything under $1,000. So that still allows the buyers to be competitive. They can still get their, do the due diligence and get their inspection done and still be competitive in this type of market that we're in right now, the seller's market.
Kate, do you see a lot of kind of customizations of the typical purchase agreements now, given the market factors, what an extreme seller's market it is and how fast things are moving?
I don't see, we're not seeing purchase agreements change drastically, but people are getting creative with some of the offers that they write. So, there's just so much, there's money can do everything, but you can get creative with the inspection period time, like I mentioned. You can change, you can get your client the mortgage process. You can get a lot of it underwritten so that they can close quicker. There's a lot of different things like that you can do. So we're not seeing the purchase agreements necessarily change, but we're seeing some of these additional ways to satisfy all the pieces of the purchase agreement. We're seeing,
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
An important piece of information that a purchase agreement is going to require the seller to provide is title information. What's the state of the legal title to the property? And I know Matt has been dealing with a dispute where some purchasers really kind of missed the boat. And it was like, what were you thinking? So you want to talk about the importance of searching the title, Matt, what you can find and what you may not find, and what that means for the transaction?
Sure. In the situation you're talking about, and I won't get into details, we did not represent the purchasers, but it was more of an investment for them that turned into a bad investment. If they just looked at title, it may have come off as clear, but had they just seen the house, this was a sight unseen, there's a purchase sight unseen. Had they gone to the house, they would have seen that there is an occupant of the house, that she maintained the property. Even searching title, there are red flags that they should have seen, like a mortgage that had not been discharged. And the reason the mortgage had not been discharged is because the mortgage was not paid yet, because there was the actual owner of the property was still paying it. But they did not do any due diligence. They thought they saw a too good to be true deal, and it was too good to be true. I have seen some purchases that are done without inspections, or there are as is clauses. In those situations, it's usually a seller who never had possession of the property, maybe through a foreclosure or some other venture. They don't know what the property is. They can't guarantee anything. They don't look at anything. Again, you're taking a risk there. Even through title, you're taking a risk. Engaging a title company, engaging an attorney, and look, to engage an attorney, this isn't going to cost you your life savings to have an attorney do a search into the title work and see if there's another interest, if there's a problem, and you can have peace of mind by doing a search. Attorneys who work in this field know how to navigate through the Register of Deeds. They know what to look for, and they can save a lot of time and grief later on by spending a couple bucks beforehand.
I will note that there are exemptions to the seller's disclosure requirements. So sometimes a seller won't know what to disclose because they maybe inherited the home, or it's being court ordered to sell, and so they may truly not know anything. So it's absolutely imperative to get other professionals involved, like attorneys and title companies, to do the searches. You just gotta lift up every rock and see what's going on under there, because there's lots of different ways things can get kind of hairy, and knowledge is power. That is the best statement ever. Knowledge is power. And when you're going through the transaction, the purchase agreement is our guide. That is what we're working with, and the purchase agreement will address, all these different points and give you the time and the suggestion to review everything and have everything looked at: title, insurance, title, the title policy, the title search, have an attorney review, have an inspection, mortgage, everything. So there's the purchase agreement is really, really super important. And reading it, I know it's a lot of heavy wording at times for maybe some average buyers, but it's important to ask questions and get professionals to guide you through the process.
Let's talk about condos as kind of a unique breed of cat, and residences actually becoming less and less unique and more the norm in terms of purchases, because condominiums can be attached units that maybe it's kind of the traditional notion of what a condominium is, more apartment style living. But you also have detached or site condominiums, and from a casual drive-by inspection, those condominium units may just look like a traditional subdivision.
Right.
And actually, it has been said that the condominium development process really represented, with site condos, the deregulation of the subdivision process. It's a lot cheaper to build condominiums as site condominiums as opposed to traditional houses in subdivisions. A lot of expenses can be bypassed with that process. And so it's become very popular because you can sell at a perhaps more affordable price, and people can afford more. But when you get into the purchase of a condo, if you're buying into new units, new construction, then the state law has a lot of regulation about what must be disclosed to you. And I can tell you from experience, good and bad, that you need to go into buying new construction condominiums with your eyes wide open. The state law requires that the developer make disclosures about who the developer is, what their relative experience is in development, and a host of other factors that too many people just bypass it. There are so often, talk to any number of individuals who got into the process of buying a condo and actually bought and are owning the condo. And if they had only known, at the time, that the developer didn't really have the capital available to complete the development. So it ends up you buy into a 100-unit condominium and they only sell 20 units and can't seem to sell more. So all of a sudden, instead of having your expenses shared with 100 neighbors, you have to share the expenses with only 20 neighbors. And so there are risks involved that you can find the information from these sellers' disclosures so that, so that you can minimize the risk associated with that purchase. And it is complicated. The purchase agreements are much more complicated for new construction condominiums than they are for existing housing. The developer's disclosures are complicated. My advice is don't go it alone, but at an absolute minimum, read the stuff. I mean, there are so many people who didn't. Maybe they weren't aware that that information was there. I certainly have seen places where that information mandated by state law was not provided, probably for good reasons, because the developer didn't want people to know what they were buying into. Otherwise, with condominiums, if you get past new development in those special disclosures that a developer has to make to a purchaser, just in general, you know that it's a little bit different breed of cat than just buying a house on Main Street. You have the governing documents for a condominium, and those are matters of public record. They're recorded with the Register of Deeds. So often I hear people who have bought a condominium say, well, they never gave me a copy of the master deed or the bylaws and those governing documents. Those are matters of public record. You are charged with having legal knowledge of the contents of those documents when you buy that property, whether you chose to read them or not, whether you chose to pursue getting copies of those so you can read it before you get involved. Restrictions and bylaws, that's something that a lot of people trip over. Perhaps, they want to have pets. They want a motorcycle, other things that are particular to their lifestyle. And if they had taken the time to read the bylaws before putting their money down, they may have saved themselves a lot of grief. Maybe you'll end up needing to sacrifice things of your personal lifestyle because there are restrictions keeping you from enjoying that in the particular condominium where you buy. But just know that those things are in there. Read it, read it, read it, read it before you buy, because after you buy, you are invested and you can't just back out because you say, well, I don't like these restrictions that they're not.
We could always sell.
Could always sell, but that wasn't your plan going in after
No.
6 months. But some people do.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've seen that,
Yeah.
Someone may buy in, they don't like it. And I've seen that 3 months later, they turn around and like, I'm getting out of here.
Yep.
But that's a lot of expense
It is.
associated with a mismove like that. There are other things in condominiums, rules and regulations that have been developed. And those aren't necessarily recorded with the Register of Deeds. So you're going to have to make your inquiries to get that information from the seller. Financial information, so important with condominiums, so important with condominiums, so important with condominiums. What is the financial health of that community? New developments, when you're looking at what the monthly charges will be for maintenance or condominium dues, those things are artificially set low by the developer. It's going to go up. So you have to know that information to know if you're really going to be able to afford to live there 2 years down the road, when they do the math and figure these assessments shouldn't be $100 a month, they should be $250 a month. There's a way that you can get that information so that you'll know those things. There are professionals out there who will help you make those determinations, make those inquiries. Financials for condominiums, so very important. Reserve funds. You can find out how much is kept in a reserve fund to assure that in a condominium where the association's going to have to replace the roofs after 20 years or replace the roads, it's going to take a lot of money. Where's that money come from? Kate Saulsberry doesn't give it to you. It's going to come out of your pocket with the other residents there. And so if you take a look at the reserve funds and you compare what those funds are to the age of the community, how well funded are the reserves? If you have a 12-year-old community and they have no reserves and you're starting to see some wear and tear, where's that money going to come from? It's got to come from the co-owners of the property. Look into those things so you go in eyes wide open and make inquiries about how that property is managed. Typically, you'll find that there are professional property management companies out there that are managing condominiums. In some cases, that's not the case. Communities are what we call self-managed. They don't have a professional manager. But if there is a professional manager, that's good because you'll have a source to help you get this information when you're making the purchase provision. Check to see whether the condominium association you're looking to buy into has a website, because that website may have a lot of information in there available to tell you about the community, what its amenities are, maybe talk a little bit about itself. Sometimes they do things like post the board meeting minutes on the website, so you can get in and see how the association is governing itself, what its board meetings look like. Sometimes you may see postings on these things where there's a lot of fighting going on with people backbiting at each other. And, you know, if you see something like that, it's like, look out. You may have found out that you're going to buy into a community that has a contentious spirit. If that floats your boat, good, but not mine. So, but that information is available, know it, and you have the ability to get that from your seller in different ways. If you're buying a property in a homeowners association, you're not going to have the same level of organization or restrictions maybe that you would if you bought into a condominium. Nonetheless, the governing documents for a homeowners association contain restrictions that again will speak to things that will prohibit you from doing the kind of things you want to do. For example, something that we see a lot are the restrictions in a homeowners association talk about you can't have a swimming pool, you can't have fences, or you can't have above ground swimming pools. That information is there for you. So make sure you get it, make sure you read it, make sure you understand it, make sure you're committed to it as part of the purchase of your residence. You can look at the level of activity in that community. If the governing documents regulate a lot of things and it starts to become looking more like a condominium, that's going to have a certain lifestyle. Other communities don't have the same level of activity, the same number of restrictions. Maybe there isn't that much oversight by a board of directors. You may find out that there's very little activity by that community, like something that I was dealing with more recently, where the Homeowners Association had not taken any legal activity to govern itself for 12 years. And the Homeowners Association had dissolved. And then when the lady tried to sell her unit there, somebody took an interest and said, you owe $8,000 in past dues. To who? You know, and so very important information that you can learn about the level of activity in a homeowners association. It's easy to take a look and see if there is a homeowners association. Is it being maintained with the state of Michigan? Are they filing the annual reports, or has it fallen into disuse and the homeowners association been dissolved? A lot of details in those things, and I just have to tell you, get that information, insist on getting it, read it, evaluate it, consult with the professionals that you need to consult with so that you can make those evaluations. Buying a home is a very, maybe, you know, your most important purchase. Make sure you do it with your eyes open.
Thank you, Ed. That's all great information. And I love the theme of tonight because it really does take a team. It takes a team of not just the buyer, not just the seller, everybody, the lender, the inspector, the realtors, the attorneys, the title company. It's everybody involved that's going to make for a great transaction.
Well, you know, and you bring up a good point, you know, that aspect of the team. I was talking with a gentleman who happened to work for Mercedes-Benz of America. And in that discussion, he was telling me about the growing number of individuals who buy a Mercedes-Benz online. And I'm like, what? If I'm going to buy a car, I'm of the school of thought that says, I want to see it, I want to smell it, I want to kick the tires. And the idea of making a major purchase like a Mercedes-Benz online, have it delivered to my front door, I suppose there's a certain attraction to that sort of purchase, but that's extreme, and I sure as heck wouldn't buy a Mercedes-Benz online, let alone an automobile of lesser cost. But you start to hear about people maybe buying residences online, you know, sight unseen, maybe doing a virtual tour. What are your thoughts about that, Kate?
Oh boy. It's usually when I first start working with buyers, usually after maybe a couple showings, I almost 100% of the time hear from my client saying, wow, this house did not look like the pictures. And I joke and it's marketing. I mean, there's a lot of marketing that goes into it. We do have restrictions on what we can and can't do to pictures. And if we do edit them, it needs to be disclosed. But there's a lot of marketing going on there. So it's we definitely have seen a lot of that those challenges, especially during COVID times, when there were restrictions in seeing homes. People were putting offers on places that they didn't see. We do have sellers that are out of the country. Even normal circumstances here, we have, I've had a client she had her mother go see the house, and then she ended up buying it based on what her mother said. So you got to trust those people that are helping you out. But it's definitely, you can't take pictures of smells. You can't take pictures of the neighbors necessarily, or, if there's an airport nearby. There's a lot of different factors. So it's so important to drive the neighborhoods, check out the area, see the house, smell the house, go during, drive by different times of day. A neighborhood looks a lot different on a Saturday warm afternoon or in the evening than it does, Tuesday morning in the winter. So You can't always see all the seasons, but it's good to try to get a variety of looks into the property that you're purchasing.
I think we need to get across home plate here and look at the closing of the sale of the residence. And Kate, what are your important thoughts about that?
Everybody wants a smooth closing, and that happens when everything else has happened prior to that. So when I get to the closing with my clients, they have reviewed all the documents. They know what they're coming in signing. They're not sitting down at the table just figuring stuff out. We have everything taken care of prior to that. So I always provide, the title companies will provide the closing documents usually a few days before, and that's something that I forward to my buyer or my seller. And I ask them, have your attorney review this with you. Let us know if you have questions. It's super important to get everything addressed prior to that. Like I said before, the purchase agreement is our guide. That is what we're working through. We have all the timelines. We've gone through everything. We've checked all the boxes. We've gone through, title's done their search. You've done all your inspections. Everything has been reviewed. So the closing should be fun. It should be like an exciting point. You're selling your house, you're buying your house. It's happening, it's finalized. We may have different goals, but at the end of the day, all of us have the same goal, is to close. And who will be at the closing. So that obviously the buyer or the seller, well, I should say not always. Sometimes sellers are out of state, or they've had to move, or maybe they're sick, or there's a power of attorney that's been appointed. So generally we will have both parties at the closing, but we don't have to. Sellers can sign at a different time than buyers, or a different location. And realtors should be there. They don't have to be there, but I think it's super important to have somebody by your side in case something does come up. Say, you forgot, or you thought of something, or you had a question or whatnot. So it's really important to have those people there. The title company is the one that's facilitating the closing here in the state of Michigan. They have a notary that is there with all the documents that are to be signed by both parties. Lenders are great to have on hand too. I work with a lot of great lenders. They like to come to the closings. They like, to be there in case anything comes up. And like I said, it should be a really great experience. People should be celebrating, or, if it's a positive, not all transactions are positive, but, if it is, the lenders do like to be there to support and congratulate. And having an attorney there to review your documents is always recommended. There are some states that attorneys are required. In the state of Michigan, we don't require them to be at the closing. What should you look for in closing documents? Like I said, the closing documents are going to have everything that was in the purchase agreement. It's going to have all the legal documents that are required to transfer the title of the property into the new owner. So all those documents will be there, and they should all be reviewed prior. It's really, really scary when you're sitting there having to, sign a big stack of documents that you have no idea what you're signing. So I can't say that enough, how important it is to have the knowledge, to have that reviewed by yourself and all your trusted partners in the transaction. And then after the sale, it's kind of cut off here. I don't know what the last question says. What do you need to do after the closing?
Yep, that's what it says.
Okay. So move in, get if there is an HOA, they usually send you a welcome packet or a welcome email of some sort. So you get that established. You'll get, move in and enjoy your home, or enjoy the sale, whatever side of the transaction you're on.
Are there sometimes documents that you might have to take somewhere from the closing if the title company doesn't do that for you?
Yeah, there's a homestead document that would need to be filed with the city. So for your taxes, that way you get the homestead, the reduced tax rate for being a primary residence. If you are if that is a primary residence for you. If you are selling, you would need to rescind any homestead status that you would have on that property, so the next owner can enjoy the benefits of the lower tax rate. Yep.
You know, I think, Kate, you mentioned, welcome package in a condominium association or an HOA. So many times I have seen situations where the new owner says, no one contacted me. I didn't know where to send the payments, that sort of thing. And so as the buyer, be engaged in that process so that you make sure that the Homeowners Association knows that you purchased this unit, because maybe a 200 unit condominium site, properties are being bought and sold frequently, and the fact that somebody new has moved in may escape the property management company. So make sure when you're buying into a condominium or an HOA that you do get noticed. Hopefully they have a welcoming package for you and give you all the details about life there and the rules and regulations and things, and send you a plate of warm cookies maybe. But make sure that you do get noticed, because so often we have seen where that doesn't happen. And maybe we see that the first 3 months of assessments haven't been paid timely. I didn't know where to send them. Well, you need to know, but just keep in mind that these things don't always just take care of themselves. And
That's true. That's very true. And you, in the review during the purchasing process, you should have the contact to the HOA. So you would have that information. And if not, that's definitely something you should have before you close.
well, I think that about wraps up what I had to say. And Kate and Matt,
I think we've covered a lot.
thank you.
There
Yeah.
are just a couple questions here. So the first one is, if something's found during the home inspection, but you still want the house, are there any remedies, or is there anything you can do with the seller, depending on what the issue is?
Absolutely. Everything's negotiable. It doesn't mean that they'll agree to that. But I always recommend negotiating everything if there are issues. Generally, I like to break down things. There might be a honey to-do list of issues, or safety and concern and health issues, and those are really the ones we should focus on. But definitely, you should definitely see what they're willing to do. Even in this type of market, we do see sellers negotiating. There are still negotiations that can be had, and maybe you don't get everything that you're asking for. Maybe you get some maybe some financial considerations, so you get some money back or money towards the closing costs. But I always recommend asking, definitely.
And Ed, sometimes people modify their condo property or their HOA property. What if you find out that there's a modification that wasn't approved after you close? Are there any remedies? Like, can you keep it, or what happens?
Boy, that's going to depend on the individual facts and circumstances of each case. And from the purchaser's viewpoint, I think, you're thinking, well, what you see is what you get. I have to assume it's okay, and I ought to be able to keep what I have. If I find out down the line that the unit was altered by the previous owner, I may not have any recourse against the association when they proceed to demand that the modification be dismantled because it was never approved. That happens. You got a sticky legal mess there, but going in, those are the kind of things that you want to really take note of. Is there any record of alterations in the unit? Were they approved and under what conditions? In a perfect world, any time where association approval was required, you hope that the owner of the unit had gone, followed the process, gotten the approvals from the association to make that change, and all the terms surrounding that change, who had what responsibilities, had been laid out and spelled out in black and white, and even appear with the records at the Register of Deeds. So when you search the title, that information ideally would be there saying, okay, these awnings were added by the owner of the property. It's not a regular part of the development. And so it's my responsibility to maintain, repair, and replace those at my expense. So, well, wait a minute, I thought it was part of the condo. So, you know, I think you need to take a look around with inspecting too. Like if you're going to buy into a condo like that, have a notion of what the standard unit looks like, so that if you see something that looks non-standard, you can ask the right questions. Was this a modification that was made by the owner? Was this modification approved? Or are we going to have problems because it is non-standard, non-approved, and I may get demands from the board of directors saying, you got to take that down. My recourse there may be against the seller for not disclosing that to me, but this may be a couple of years down the road and the seller's moved out to Florida and won't be readily accessible to provide a remedy for you. So know that, you know, there are those restrictions that when changes are made, they may need to be approved by the association, and you may have encounter problems if the process was not followed.
And that is all that we have for you this evening. We would like to thank you very much for joining us in this joint venture. And if you would like a copy of the slides, you can contact me, Melissa, at mfrancis@zdfattorneys.com. Mr. Zelmanski and Mr. Levine can be reached in our Plymouth office by phone at 734-459-0062 and by email respectively ezelmanski@zdfattorneys.com and mlevine@zdfattorneys.com. And Ms. Saulsberry can be reached by phone at 734-905-2121, or feel free to email her at katesaulsberry@gmail.com. We greatly appreciate Kate participating in this presentation, as she provides a unique perspective that none of us can provide to you, as she's in the trenches every day selling and buying condos with her clients. So we greatly appreciate it. And we will post this on our YouTube channel. And as always, feel free to visit our website and our social media. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time, and have a great evening.
Let me root for the home team. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game.